In the rugged heart of the American frontier, where justice often came at the end of a rope, Sarah Mitchell stood trembling beneath a makeshift gallows. The setting sun painted the dusty town square in shades of blood red as angry settlers tightened the noose around her neck. She was just 18, accused of cattle rustling, a crime that meant certain death in these lawless territories. The evidence against her seemed irrefutable: stolen cattle bearing her family's brand found in her possession, and a witness who swore to her guilt. But as the mob prepared to execute frontier justice, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the blood-red earth. What did this mysterious stranger know that could save an innocent girl from the hangman's noose? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Mitchell Ranch sprawled across 300 acres of Wyoming territory, a testament to 3 generations of hard work and determination. Sarah Mitchell had grown up learning every inch of this land, from the crystal-clear creek that cut through the northern pastures to the rocky outcroppings that marked their southern boundary. The family's brand, a simple M with a cross through its center, had been burned into cattle here since before she was born. Dawn found Sarah already in the saddle, her mare's hooves kicking up dust as they made their morning rounds. The spring air carried the sweet scent of prairie grass, mixing with the earthy aroma of cattle and leather. Her father's old work shirt hung loose on her frame, rolled up at the sleeves and tucked into worn denims. Since Ma's passing 3 years ago, and Pa's hands growing too twisted with arthritis to manage the daily work, Sarah had stepped into the role of ranch manager with quiet determination. "Easy there, girl," she murmured to her horse, pulling up short as they approached a group of cattle gathered near the creek. The morning light caught the dew on their backs, and Sarah counted heads with practiced efficiency. 67, exactly where they should be. The Mitchell herd wasn't the biggest in the territory, but they were known for their quality, each animal carefully bred and tended. Back at the ranch house, Thomas Mitchell sat in his favorite chair on the porch, his gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The morning sun cast long shadows across his weathered face, deepening the lines that spoke of decades under the Wyoming sky. As Sarah dismounted, he managed a smile that didn't quite hide his pain. "Herd's all accounted for, Pa," Sarah reported, taking off her hat and running a hand through her sun-streaked hair. "But we'll need to mend that fence in the north pasture soon. Saw some posts starting to lean." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes drifting to the distant hills. "Heard talk in town yesterday. Whitaker's offering $3 more per head than last season. Might be time to consider selling some of our stock." Sarah leaned against the porch railing, her expression thoughtful. The Whitaker Trading Company had been expanding aggressively, buying up cattle from every ranch in the territory. Some said old man Whitaker had connections all the way to Chicago, but something about their rapid growth made Sarah uneasy. "I don't trust them, Pa, the way they've been pressuring the smaller ranches to sell." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Besides, our beef's worth more than what they're offering. The Army contract ain't guaranteed," Thomas interrupted, his voice carrying a rare edge. "Times are changing, Sarah. Maybe we need to change with them." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the road leading to their ranch, dust clouds billowing behind them. Sarah recognized the lead rider's distinctive black hat, Clayton Werner, Whitaker's head buyer. Her hand instinctively moved to rest on the worn grip of her father's old colt, secured firmly at her hip. The riders pulled up short of the house, their horses stamping restlessly in the packed earth of the yard. Werner's smile didn't reach his eyes as he tipped his hat to Sarah and her father. "Beautiful morning, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell," Werner called out, his voice carrying the polished tone of someone more accustomed to city boardrooms than ranch yards. "Thought we might have a word about your herd. Mr. Whitaker's authorized me to make a very generous offer." Sarah felt her father tense beside her, but she kept her voice steady. "Our cattle aren't for sale, Mr. Werner. same as they weren't last month, or the month before that. Werner's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Times are changing, miss. Mitchell, smart ranchers know when to adapt. Hate to see a fine operation like yours get left behind. His eyes swept across the ranch, lingering on the weathered buildings and aging equipment, especially with prices being what they are. The threat in his words was clear enough, even if it was wrapped in a gentleman's courtesy. Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze directly. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Werner, but our answer stands. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to attend to. As the riders turned their horses and headed back down the road, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last they'd see of Clayton Werner. The Mitchell Ranch might not have been the biggest spread in the territory, but their water rights and prime grazing land made it valuable, too valuable to be left alone for long. That evening, as Sarah checked the books by lamplight, the numbers stared back at her with unforgiving clarity. The ranch was surviving, but barely. Between the rising cost of supplies and the falling price of beef, their margins grew thinner with each passing season. She thought of her father's worsening arthritis, of the repairs the ranch house needed, of the new equipment they couldn't afford to buy. Yet underneath the worry, a fierce determination burned. This land wasn't just property, it was her heritage, her future, and her responsibility. Whatever Whitaker and his men were planning, Sarah Mitchell had no intention of becoming another small rancher forced to sell out to their growing empire. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later, during Sarah's pre-dawn check of the northern pasture. The heavy mist that had settled overnight still clung to the ground, making it difficult to spot the cattle at first. But as the sun began to pierce through the haze, her heart sank. Where there should have been 30 head of prime beef cattle, she counted only 22. Sarah urged her horse forward, scanning the ground for tracks. The grass was trampled in places, showing signs of multiple riders. These weren't strays that had simply wandered off. This was theft, plain and simple. Following the trail, she found where the fence had been cut, the wire twisted and mangled. Beside it lay something that made her blood run cold. A broken piece of wood bearing the Mitchell brand. Back at the ranch house, Thomas Mitchell's face grew grave as Sarah reported what she'd found. "We need to alert the marshal," he said, reaching for his coat despite the pain evident in his movements. "I'll ride into town," Sarah insisted, already heading for the door. "You stay here in case they come back." The streets of Thunder Creek were unusually busy for early morning. Sarah noticed several faces turned toward her as she rode past, expressions unreadable. Outside the marshal's office, a small crowd had gathered, their voices hushed but urgent. Marshal James Hawkins stood on the wooden sidewalk, his badge catching the morning light. As Sarah dismounted, she saw Clayton Werner step out from behind him, that same cold smile playing across his face. "Miss Mitchell," the marshal called, out his tone formal. "Convenient timing. We were just about to ride out to your ranch. Marshal, I'm here to report stolen cattle. 8 head missing from our north pasture, fence cut." "That's right interesting," Werner interrupted, "considering we found 12 head of cattle in the Box Canyon last night. Cattle bearing your brand, Miss Mitchell." He pulled a folded paper, and from his vest. "Along with this bill of sale, showing you sold them to Jake Turner 2 days ago. Only Jake swears he never bought them." Sarah's mind raced. "That's impossible. I never—" "We have a witness." The marshal's voice was heavy. "Says he saw you and 2 men moving cattle through the canyon yesterday evening. Tom Whitaker himself vouches for his character." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. This was a setup, carefully orchestrated to discredit her and the ranch. But before she could speak, more riders appeared at the edge of town, Whitaker's men leading a string of cattle. Even from this distance, she could see her family's brand on their flanks. "Sarah Mitchell," Marshal Hawkins said formally, "you're under arrest for cattle rustling." The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah found herself in the town's small jail, the iron bars casting shadows across the wooden floor. Through the window she could hear the growing crowd outside, their voices rising with anger. Cattle rustling wasn't just theft out here, it was a threat to everyone's livelihood, and the territory had little patience for rustlers. Word spread quickly, and by afternoon, the mood in Thunder Creek had turned ugly. Sarah watched, as normally. Reasonable townspeople worked themselves into a frenzy, fueled by rumors and long-standing resentments against any rancher who refused to sell to Whitaker. "They're saying you've been running a rustling operation for months," her father told her during his brief visit, his voice shaking with worry. "That you've been using our brand to steal and resell cattle all over the territory." "Pa, you know." "That's not true," Sarah pleaded, gripping the iron bars. "This is Whitaker's doing. They're trying to force us to sell." Thomas Mitchell nodded, but his eyes were filled with fear. "The marshal's supposed to hold a hearing tomorrow, but he..." glanced toward the window where shouts could be heard from the gathering crowd. "Some folks are talking about taking matters into their own hands." As night fell, Sarah could see torchlight through her cell window, hear the growing calls for frontier justice. The marshal's occasional attempts to calm the crowd seemed half-hearted. At best, she thought of her mother, of the strength she'd always shown in the face of adversity. "Keep your head high," she used to say, "and your heart true." But as the lock on her cell turned in the middle of the night and rough hands dragged her out into the torchlit street, Sarah felt that courage wavering. The crowd had swollen to include not just townspeople, but riders from neighboring ranches, all of them caught up in the fever of mob justice. Someone had already thrown a rope over the branch of the old oak tree in the town square. Clayton Werner stood at the edge of the crowd, his face illuminated by torchlight, watching with that same cold smile as they dragged her toward the makeshift gallows. "Wait!" Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm innocent. This is all a lie. Cattle rustlers always claim they're innocent," someone shouted from the crowd. "String her up!" As they secured the noose around her neck, Sarah looked up at the stars scattered across the Wyoming sky. She thought of her father, alone at the ranch, of the land her family had worked for generations. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from fear, but from the injustice of it all. The crowd grew quiet as Marshal Hawkins stepped forward, his face troubled but resolved. "Sarah Mitchell, you've been found guilty of cattle rustling by the people of this territory. Have you any last words?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a sound, a new voice cut through the night air, deep, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. "I believe I might have something to say about that." All heads turned toward the source of the voice. A lone rider sat atop a dark horse at the edge of the torchlight, his features shadowed by a wide-brimmed black hat. The crowd parted instinctively as he urged his mount forward, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who commanded attention without asking for it. "This execution stops now." His voice carried across the square without being raised, each word measured and deliberate. As he dismounted, the silver handle of a Colt revolver gleamed at his hip, though his hand never strayed toward it. Marshal Hawkins stepped forward, hand resting on his own weapon. "This here's a territorial matter, stranger. Best ride on." The newcomer reached slowly into his coat and withdrew a silver pocket watch. He held it up, letting the firelight catch. The engraving on its surface. Name's James Cooper, U.S. Marshal's Office, Wyoming Territory. The watch bore the official seal that every person present recognized, the symbol of federal authority. "That may be," Clayton Werner spoke up, moving through the crowd, "but we have a witness who saw her running stolen cattle. The territory's laws are clear about rustlers." Cooper's weathered face remained impassive as he tucked the watch away. "Interesting thing about witnesses, Mr. Werner. They tend to be more reliable when they're not being paid to lie." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder. "Found these in a camp just outside Box Canyon. Seemed worth reading." He opened the folder and began to read in a clear voice. "Payment to Jake Morris, $50 for testimony against Mitchell Ranch. Payment to Bill Hawley, $75 for assistance in cattle relocation." His eyes lifted to meet Werner's. There's quite a list here, all signed by Tom Whitaker himself. The crowd stirred uneasily. Werner's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. That's a lie. Those documents are forgeries. Are they? Cooper pulled something else from his saddlebag, a branding iron, its end still carrying traces of soot. This is interesting too. Found it right alongside those papers. Look closely at the brand. Sarah, still standing with the noose around her neck, squinted in the torchlight. The brand appeared to be the Mitchell's M with a cross, but something was off about it. The lines weren't quite right. It's a counterfeit, Cooper explained, holding it up for all to see. Crude work, but good enough to fool someone at a distance, especially in the dark, when cattle are being moved quietly through back canyons. The marshal moved closer, examining the brand. His face darkened as he realized the implications. You're saying... I'm saying Miss Mitchell here isn't your rustler. She's your victim. Someone's been stealing cattle, rebranding them with this counterfeit iron to match the Mitchell brand, then planting them to frame her. Cooper's gaze swept the crowd. Question is, who stands to benefit most from the Mitchell ranch being destroyed? A murmur ran through the gathered townspeople. Eyes turned toward Clayton Werner, who had begun to edge backward toward his horse. Hold him, Cooper commanded, and several men moved to grab Werner before he could flee. Marshal Hawkins, I believe you'll find the rest of the stolen cattle in a hidden corral 3 miles north of Box Canyon, along with more evidence of who's really behind this operation. Sarah felt gentle hands removing the noose from her neck. She stumbled slightly, the tension of the moment leaving her legs weak. Cooper stepped forward, offering steady support. Thank you, she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. Don't thank me yet, he replied quietly. This isn't over. Whitaker won't take this lying down, and there's more to this than just cattle rustling. He studied her face for a moment. How well do you know your water rights, Miss Mitchell? Before she could answer, her father pushed through the crowd, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Over his shoulder, Sarah watched as Marshal Hawkins began reading Werner his rights. The crowd that had been ready to hang her minutes ago now looked on, in shocked silence, their bloodlust replaced by shame and confusion. Cooper mounted his horse, the movement drawing Sarah's attention. Get some rest, he told her. Tomorrow, we start finding out just how deep this conspiracy really goes. With a touch of his hat brim, he turned his horse and rode out of the torchlight, leaving behind a town grappling with how close they'd come to executing an innocent woman. As the crowd dispersed and the torches were extinguished one by one, Sarah stood with her father in the darkening square. The night wind carried the promise of rain, and with it, the sense that everything was about to change. James Cooper might have saved her life, but something in his words suggested this was just the beginning of a much larger storm. Dawn found Sarah and Cooper riding toward Box Canyon, the morning air still carrying the chill of night. They'd left Thomas Mitchell at the ranch, despite his protests, with 2 deputies posted for protection. Cooper led the way, his horse picking through the rocky terrain with practiced ease. Whitaker's been buying up ranches all across the territory, Cooper explained as they rode. But it's not just about cattle. Every property he's acquired sits on key water sources or strategic trail crossings. They reached a narrow gap in the canyon walls, barely wide enough for their horses to pass single file. Cooper dismounted, gesturing for Sarah to do the same. Hidden behind a cluster of boulders, they found the remains of a camp, carefully concealed from casual observation. This is where I found the brand, Cooper said, kneeling to examine the ground. But there's more. He moved aside some brush, revealing a cache of documents half buried in the dirt. Whitaker wasn't just planning to frame you. He's been doing this systematically. Sarah picked up one of the papers, its edges crumbling. It was a deed transfer, signed under duress by a rancher she knew, old Bill Henderson, who'd lost his spread last winter. They forced him to sell, she realized, just like they were trying to force us. Whitaker's building an empire, Cooper confirmed, gathering the documents. But he needs control of the water to do it. Your ranch sits on one of the territory's main aquifers. Without it, His whole plan falls apart. A sound echoed through the canyon, horses approaching. Cooper motioned for silence, drawing Sarah behind a large boulder. 3 riders passed below their position, Whitaker's men by their dress. They were talking freely, unaware of being overheard. "Boss wants this wrapped up quick," one said. "That federal marshal's going to be trouble." "Won't matter once we get the water rights," another replied. "Railroad's already agreed to the deal. Whole territory's going to change." After the riders passed, Sarah turned to Cooper. "The railroad. What do they have to do with this?" "Everything." Cooper's face was grim. "Whitaker's not just a cattle baron. He's a front man for the railroad companies. They're planning a major expansion through the territory, but they need to control the water sources along the route. Your ranch and others like it stand in their way." They spent the next hour documenting everything they found in the camp. Cooper was methodical, treating each piece of evidence like a crucial puzzle piece. Sarah watched him work, noting the professional way he catalogued and stored each item. "How long have you been tracking them?" she asked finally. Cooper paused, considering his answer. 8 months. Started as a simple cattle rustling investigation. Turned into something bigger when I noticed the pattern. Small ranchers being forced out, water rights changing hands, all leading back to Whitaker and the railroad's planned expansion. A flutter of paper caught Sarah's attention. Partially. Hidden under a rock, she found a letter bearing Whitaker's letterhead. The contents made her blood run cold. "Cooper," she called, "look at this." The letter detailed plans for dealing with uncooperative ranchers, including specific instructions for creating false evidence of crimes. Sarah's name wasn't the only one listed. There were at least a dozen others marked for similar treatment. "This is it," Cooper said, carefully folding the letter into his evidence pouch. "Proof of conspiracy. But Whitaker's got friends in high places. Taking him down won't be easy." Sarah stood, brushing dust from her clothes. "Then we make sure the evidence is overwhelming. There must be more camps like this, more proof of what they're doing." Cooper studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "It'll be dangerous. Whitaker's men won't hesitate to kill over this. They already tried to hang me," Sarah replied firmly. "I won't let them destroy other families. The way they almost destroyed mine." A ghost of a smile crossed Cooper's face. "All right then, but we do this smart. No risks, no heroics. From here on out we work together." As they mounted up to return to the ranch, Sarah felt a new sense of purpose. The fear and helplessness of the previous night had been replaced by determination. With Cooper's help, she had a chance not just to clear her name, but to stop Whitaker from victimizing others. The sun was high when they rode back into the ranch yard. Thomas Mitchell waited on the porch, his face lined with worry until he saw their expressions. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. "We found everything, Pa," Sarah replied, dismounting. "And this is just the beginning." Inside the ranch house, Thomas Mitchell's cough echoed through the wooden walls. Sarah found him in his chair, clutching a small brown medicine bottle, his face ashen. The stress of the past day had taken its toll. "Pa, you need to rest," she said, moving quickly to his side. The bottle was nearly empty. They'd need to send for more from Doc Wilson soon. Another expense they could barely afford. Cooper stood in the doorway, his presence somehow filling the small room. "Mr. Mitchell, I believe we can protect your daughter and the ranch, but I need to understand everything that's happened here over the past few months." Thomas nodded weakly, gesturing toward his desk. "Sarah, the bottom drawer. There's a stack of letters." She retrieved them, dozens of offers from Whitaker's company, each one more insistent than the last. Cooper spread them across the table chronologically, creating a timeline of escalating pressure. "They started friendly enough," Thomas explained between coughs. "Fair offers at first, then the prices started dropping. Water became scarcer in the north pasture. Found out later they'd diverted the creek upstream. Cattle went missing, just a few head at a time. Nothing we could prove." "Classic intimidation tactics," Cooper muttered, examining the letters. "They've done this before." Sarah touched her father's shoulder, feeling the tremors running through his frame. Pa. Take your medicine and lie down. We'll handle this." Once Thomas was settled in his room, Sarah returned to find Cooper studying a map of the territory spread across the table. Red marks indicated Whitaker's recent acquisitions, forming a pattern she'd never noticed before. "See it?" Cooper asked, tracing a line with his finger. "Every purchase follows the proposed railroad route. Your ranch isn't just about water rights, it's a crucial passage through the mountains. Without it, they'd have to lay track through 100 miles of rough country." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah's hand moved to her father's old Colt, but Cooper shook his head, already moving silently toward the window. "Marshal Hawkins," he announced quietly. "But he's not alone." Sarah opened the door to find the marshal and 2 other men. One she recognized as Judge Wilson from the territorial court. The other, a sharp-dressed Easterner with a gold watch chain across his vest, was unfamiliar. "Miss Mitchell," Hawkins said, removing his hat. "This here's Mr. James Carrington from the railroad company. He'd like a word." Cooper emerged from the shadows, his presence causing Carrington to start slightly. "I'm sure he would." "The railroad." Man recovered quickly, offering a practiced smile. "Marshal Cooper, your reputation precedes you. I'm here to offer a solution that benefits everyone." "By everyone, you mean the railroad," Cooper replied evenly. Carrington's smile didn't waver. "Progress is inevitable, Marshal. The railroad will connect this territory to markets back east, bring civilization to the frontier. Surely we can reach an arrangement that compensates the Mitchells fairly for their cooperation." "Like you compensated Bill Henderson?" Sarah asked, sharply. "Or the other ranchers you forced out?" "Those are serious accusations, Miss Mitchell," Judge Wilson spoke up. "Without proof." "We have proof," Cooper interrupted, "enough to put Whitaker and his associates away for a very long time, including anyone in the territorial government who's been helping them." The judge's face reddened, but Carrington remained calm. "Come now, Marshal. Surely we can discuss this like reasonable people. The railroad's board of directors would be very grateful for your discretion in this matter. Are you trying to bribe a federal marshal?" Cooper's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Not at all. Simply pointing out that a man of your talents could have a bright future with the railroad, much brighter than chasing rustlers across the territory." Sarah watched the exchange, noting how Marshal Hawkins seemed to shrink into himself, while Judge Wilson's expression grew increasingly nervous. The corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. "I think we're done here," Cooper said firmly. "Unless you'd like to add attempted bribery of a federal officer to the charges." Carrington's smile finally faded. "This isn't over, Marshal. Progress doesn't stop for one stubborn rancher and a territorial lawman who doesn't know his place." After they left, Sarah turned to Cooper. "They'll try something else now." "Yes," he agreed, moving back to the map, "and we need to be ready when they do." Before dawn the next morning, Cooper spread an old trail map across the ranch house table. Its edges were worn, the paper yellowed with age, but the markings were still clear, cattle trails that had crossed this territory for generations. "Whitaker's men have been using these old paths," Cooper explained, tracing a line with his finger. "Moving stolen cattle through back country where nobody looks anymore. But they made a mistake. They got predictable." Sarah leaned over the map, her brow furrowed in concentration. "These trails all converge at Thunder Creek, but there's another way." She pointed to a faint line that wound through the mountains. "Pa used to talk about this route. The Spanish Trail, harder to follow, but it cuts straight through to the railroad camp." Cooper's eyes lit with interest. "How well do you know it?" "Well enough. Pa took me up there when I was younger, showed me the old markers, said it might come in handy someday." They rode out as the sun crested the eastern hills, taking care to avoid the main trails. Sarah led them through narrow passes and hidden valleys, places where the old Spanish trail still clung to the mountainside like a half-forgotten memory. Near midday, they found their first sign: fresh hoofprints leading to a sheltered canyon. Cooper dismounted, examining the ground with practiced eyes. 8, maybe 10 horses passed through here yesterday. They followed the tracks to another hidden camp, this one larger than the first. Empty food tins and cigarette butts suggested recent use. Cooper moved methodically through the site while Sarah kept watch. "Look at this," he called softly. Among the scattered supplies, he'd found a ledger book, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and dates. Delivery schedules. They're not just stealing cattle, they're running an entire operation. Sarah flipped through the pages, recognition dawning. These dates match up with when ranches started having trouble. Henderson's cattle disappeared here, the Wilsons here. She paused, finding her own family's name. They've been planning this for months. A distant sound caught their attention, horses moving through the canyon below. They quickly gathered the evidence and found cover behind a cluster of boulders. 3 riders passed by, leading a string of cattle. Even from their hiding place, Sarah could see the fresh brands on the animals' flanks. "Those are Pearson's cattle," she whispered. "His ranch is 20 miles north. They must have hit him last night." Cooper nodded grimly. "And they'll keep hitting others until we stop them. But we need more than just this ledger. We need to catch them in the act." As they waited for the riders to pass, Sarah studied the map again. "There's an old line shack, about 5 miles up the trail." Pa said, "The Spanish traders used it as a waypoint. If they're moving this many cattle, they'd need a place to hold them," Cooper finished. "Somewhere off the main trails, with water and grazing." The line shack proved to be more than they'd hoped. From a hidden ridge above it, they could see a makeshift corral had been built in the adjacent valley. At least 50 head of cattle milled about inside, their brands a mixture of different ranches. "This is one of their staging areas," Cooper said, studying the setup through his field glasses. "They hold the cattle here, then move them out in smaller groups. Makes it harder to track." A rider emerged from the line shack, and Sarah felt her breath catch. She recognized him, Billy Hawkins, the marshal's son. The corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. Cooper saw him too. "That explains why the marshal was so quick to arrest you. His own family's involved." They spent the afternoon documenting everything: the cattle, the brands, the comings and goings of riders. Cooper was thorough, making detailed notes that would hold up in court. "It's not enough," he said finally, packing away his notebook. "This proves the rustling, but not the connection to Whitaker and the railroad. We need something that ties it all together." Sarah thought of Carrington's visit, his smooth threats disguised as offers. What about the railroad camp? If Whitaker's moving the cattle through there, Cooper considered this. It's heavily guarded. Getting in won't be easy. "But if we could," Sarah pressed, "what would we need to find?" "Shipping manifests. Proof they're moving stolen cattle on railroad stock cars. That would connect everything: the rustling, the land grabs, the water rights." As they rode back to the ranch, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The railroad's construction was moving closer every day, and with it, the pressure on the remaining independent ranchers would only increase. "They'll come for the ranch again," she said as they dismounted in the yard. Cooper nodded, his expression determined. "Yes, but this time we'll be ready for them." The threatening letter arrived with the morning sun, slipped under the ranch house door sometime during the night. Sarah found it while Cooper checked the perimeter, making sure they hadn't had any other unwelcome visitors. "To the Mitchell family," she read aloud when he returned, her voice steady despite the paper trembling in her hands. "Your continued interference in territorial matters has become a concern. The railroad's expansion represents progress that cannot be stopped. A previous generous offer was extended. That offer expires at sundown tomorrow. After that, we cannot guarantee the safety of your property or persons." Cooper took the letter, examining the paper quality and handwriting. High-grade stationery. This came from someone educated, likely Easton, Carrington probably. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," Sarah noted, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "They don't need to. With the judge in their pocket and half the territorial officials on their payroll, they think they're untouchable." Cooper accepted the coffee, his expression thoughtful. "But that kind of arrogance makes people careless." A horse's whinny from The corral interrupted their discussion. Sarah moved to the window, then quickly stepped back. Riders coming. At least 6 of them. Cooper peered out carefully. Whitaker's men. Armed. He turned to Sarah. There's a back way out of here. Through the kitchen, but... She stopped as Cooper pressed his rifle into her hands. Get your father and go. I'll hold them here. No. Sarah checked the rifle's action with practiced ease. This is my home. I'm not running. Before Cooper could argue, Thomas Mitchell's voice carried from his bedroom. Sarah, someone's in the barn. Cooper moved silently to the kitchen window. 2 more riders had circled behind the house, dismounting near the barn. They're trying to box us in. Sarah's mind raced through options. The barn was connected to the house by an underground root cellar, a remnant from the early days when settler raids were common. The cellar, she whispered. We can use it to flank them. Understanding flickered in Cooper's eyes. He nodded approval, impressed by her tactical thinking. They split up, Cooper taking the front, Sarah moving through the cellar to emerge behind the barn. The morning air was tense with anticipation. Mitchell, a voice called out. Time's up. Come on out, and maybe we can still make a deal. Sarah recognized the voice. Luke Watson, one of Whitaker's top men. Through a gap in the barn boards, she could see him and his partner moving cautiously between the stalls. Cooper's voice rang out from the house, calm and authoritative. This is U.S. Marshal Cooper. You're trespassing on private property and threatening a federal witness. I suggest you leave while you can. Gunfire erupted from the front of the house, the riders trying to pin Cooper down. Sarah used the distraction to slip into the barn through the back door, moving silently between the shadows of farm equipment and stored hay. Watson and his partner were focused on the house, unaware of her approach. She could hear them planning to set fire to the barn, force them out into the open. "Drop your guns!" she commanded, stepping into view with her rifle ready. "Nice and slow." The men spun around, hands instinctively moving toward their holsters. "Well, look who learned to bite back," Watson sneered. "I wouldn't," Sarah warned, as his hand twitched toward his gun. "I've been shooting since I could walk. Way I figure it, at this range I can't miss." More gunfire from outside, but closer now. Cooper must have worked his way around to flank the riders. Watson's partner lost his nerve, dropping his gun and raising his hands. "You're making a mistake, girl," Watson growled. "Whitaker doesn't forgive people who cross him." "Neither do I," Sarah replied coldly. "Not when they threaten my family." The shootout ended quickly after that. Cooper had managed to wound 2 of the riders, while the others fled when they realized their plan had failed. Watson and his partner were tied up in the barn, waiting for the territorial deputies Cooper had sent for. "Found this on Watson," Cooper said later, holding up a folded paper. "Orders signed by Whitaker himself. Direct authorization for using any means necessary to secure the property." Sarah stared at the paper, her jaw set. "More evidence for your case, and more reason for them to come at us harder next time." Cooper looked at her with concern. "You handled yourself well in the barn, but this is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know." Sarah watched as the deputies led Watson and his partner away. "But we're getting closer to the truth. They wouldn't be trying so hard to stop us if we weren't." That evening, as they fortified the ranch house and planned their next move, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line. The game had changed. It wasn't just about land and water rights anymore. It was about power, corruption, and the future of the entire territory. And somewhere out there, Whitaker and his railroad allies were planning their next move. "Again," Cooper said, his voice firm but patient. The morning sun had barely crested the hills, but they'd been at this for an hour already. Sarah adjusted her stance, feeling the weight of Cooper's gun belt around her waist. "Speed is good," he continued, circling her, "but accuracy matters more. A fast draw that misses is just wasted time." Sarah focused on the tin cans arranged on the fence post 30 paces away. Her father's old Colt was reliable, but Cooper's gun belt was different, designed for quick draws and fluid movement. Her hand hovered near the holster. "Now!" In one smooth motion, she drew and fired. The first can flew off the post. The second shot went wide, but the third found its mark. Better. Cooper stepped closer, adjusting her grip slightly. But you're anticipating the recoil. Let the gun be part of your arm. Like this. His hands guided her through the proper motion, his presence steady and reassuring behind her. I've been shooting my whole life, Sarah said, trying again. This time both cans disappeared from the fence post. Shooting's one thing. Shooting when someone's shooting back is another. Cooper reloaded the revolver, his movements precise and practiced. Out here, you don't get second chances. They spent the morning working on various scenarios, drawing from different positions, shooting while moving, reloading under pressure. Cooper was thorough, sharing techniques he'd learned through years of experience. Where did you learn all this? Sarah asked during a water break, watching as he effortlessly demonstrated a complicated draw and fire sequence. Cooper was quiet for a moment, checking the cylinder of his revolver. Started as a deputy in Kansas. Learned quick that being fast wasn't enough. You had to be smart, had to read people. He holstered the gun with practiced ease, lost some good friends learning those lessons. Sarah heard the weight of memory in his voice. And now you're a U.S. marshal. Now I try to stop others from making the same mistakes. He turned to her, his expression serious. The railroad's men, they're not just thugs. They're organized, well-funded. They'll come at us from angles we don't expect. Like trying to hang me for rustling. Exactly. Physical threats we can handle. It's the other kind you have to watch for, the ones hiding behind badges and business suits. They moved on to hand-to-hand techniques. Cooper showed her how to break holds, how to use an opponent's weight against them. Sarah was a quick study, her ranch work having built the strength and reflexes needed. Your size can be an advantage, he explained, demonstrating a throw that sent her rolling across the grass. They'll underestimate you. Use that. By midday, Sarah's muscles ached, but she felt more confident. Cooper had shown her not just techniques, but ways of thinking, how to read situations, anticipate threats, stay one step ahead. One more thing, Cooper said as they wrapped up. He pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag. Inside was a derringer, barely larger than his palm. Sometimes a hidden advantage makes all the difference. Sarah examined the small gun. It was well crafted, with pearl grips and precise engravings. It's beautiful. Belonged to my sister, Cooper's. Voice grew quiet. She faced similar threats. Didn't end well. He met Sarah's eyes. I won't let that happen again. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't just another case for him. It was personal. Thank you, she said softly, carefully securing the derringer in her boot as he'd shown her. For all of this. Cooper nodded, already moving to set up more targets. We're not done yet. Still got to work on your tracking skills. Whitaker's men are getting better at covering their trails. As they continued training through the afternoon, Sarah felt something shifting between them. Cooper wasn't just teaching her to survive. He was treating her as a partner, someone he trusted, to watch his back. And in this dangerous game, they were playing against Whitaker and the railroad. Trust might be the most valuable weapon they had. Thunder Creek's bank sat at the corner of Main Street, its red brick facade and polished windows projecting an air of respectability that Sarah had never quite trusted. As she tied her horse outside, she noticed Cooper studying the building with the same skepticism. Franklin Matthews has been the banker here for 20 years, Sarah explained, adjusting her shawl to better conceal Cooper's derringer. Every loan, every mortgage, every land deal goes through him, and every foreclosure, Cooper added quietly. Perfect position to know which ranchers are vulnerable. They entered the bank just as Matthews was seeing out another customer. The banker's round face broke into a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Mitchell, I was so relieved to hear about that unfortunate misunderstanding with the cattle. Terrible business. Yes, quite fortunate Marshal Cooper arrived when he did. Sarah matched his artificial pleasantry, Actually, we're here about some land deed questions. My father's been worried about the property boundaries. Matthews gestured them toward his private office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and cigar smoke. Always happy to help the Mitchell family. Though I must say, given your recent difficulties, perhaps this would be a good time to consider Mr. Whitaker's offer. That's actually why we're here, Cooper interjected smoothly. Need to review some documentation about recent land transfers. In the territory, official investigation. The banker's smile faltered slightly. I'm afraid banking privacy regulations. Federal Marshal's authority overrides state banking laws when investigating criminal activity. Cooper interrupted, placing his badge on the desk. Those files, please. Matthews hesitated, then moved to his filing cabinet with obvious reluctance. As he sorted through documents, Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Here we are, he said, producing a stack of folders. Though I'm not sure what you expect to find. Everything's perfectly in order. Cooper began reviewing the files. Methodically. Interesting pattern here. Every foreclosed ranch just happens to sit along the proposed railroad route, and every sale price exactly matches Whitaker's initial offers. Market forces, Matthews responded weakly. Simple economics. Simple fraud, more likely. Cooper pulled out a particular document. This deed transfer for the Henderson Ranch, dated 3 weeks before the actual foreclosure. Almost like you knew it was going to happen. The banker's face had gone pale. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Sarah leaned forward, her voice hard. You've been helping Whitaker force people out, setting impossible loan terms, calling in debts early, making sure he can sweep in and buy at rock-bottom prices. You don't understand, Matthews protested. The railroad is coming. Those who don't adapt will be left behind. I was helping people avoid the inevitable by ruining them. Sarah's anger flared. By taking everything they've worked for. Cooper held up another document. This is interesting. Large deposits to your personal account, all from shell companies tied to the railroad. That's not helping people, Mr. Matthews. That's conspiracy and fraud. The banker seemed to deflate, sinking into his chair. Whitaker has powerful friends. The governor, judges, territorial officials. They're all invested in the railroad's success. You can't fight them. Watch us, Sarah replied firmly. You'll need more than just these records. Matthews said after a long moment. In my safe. There's a ledger, the real one, showing all the transactions, the bribes, everything. He reached for a keyring with shaking hands. I kept it as insurance. Whitaker won't be pleased I've held onto it. The leather-bound ledger contained everything they needed. Detailed records of the railroad's systematic land grab, complete with names, dates, and amounts. Cooper carefully packed it away in his saddlebag. You'll testify to all this? He asked. Matthews. The banker nodded miserably. Not much choice now, is there? But you should know they're not done with the Mitchell Ranch. Whitaker has something big planned. I don't know the details, but be careful. Outside, Sarah mounted her horse, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd discovered. This is it, isn't it? Proof of the whole conspiracy. Part of it, Cooper replied, scanning the street warily. But Matthews is right. Whitaker won't take this lying down, and now we know just how far up this corruption goes. So what's our next move? Cooper secured the ledger and swung into his saddle. We get this evidence somewhere safe. Then we wait for Whitaker to make his big move, and if we can't stop it, we'll stop it, Cooper assured her. But first, we need to figure out exactly what he's planning, and something tells me we don't have much time. The wanted poster was so weathered that Sarah almost missed it, tacked to the wall of the general store beneath newer notices. But Cooper's face was unmistakable, even in the crude sketch. James Cooper, she read quietly, wanted for questioning in connection with railroad company investigation. She carefully removed the poster, noting the date, 8 months ago from a town 2 territories over. When she showed it to Cooper that evening at the ranch, his expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tension in his jaw. Didn't think any of those were still up. he said, studying the worn paper. "Whitaker's company posted them when I first started investigating. Their way of trying to discredit me." "There's more to it than that, isn't there?" Sarah pressed gently. Cooper was silent for a long moment, staring out the ranch house window at the gathering dusk. "My sister Catherine," he finally said, "she owned a small ranch in Kansas. Railroad. Wanted her land for a depot when she refused to sell." He trailed off, his hand unconsciously touching the pearl-handled derringer he'd given Sarah. "By the time I got there, it was too late. Fire, they said. Tragic accident. But you knew better. Found evidence. Followed it. Led me to Whitaker. And his operation." Cooper turned back to her, his eyes hard. "He was working for a different railroad then, but same tactics. Only this time he's got more backing, more power." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Thomas Mitchell appeared in the doorway, rifle ready despite his trembling hands. "Riders coming, at least a dozen." Cooper moved to the window, checking his guns with practiced efficiency. "Not Whitaker's usual men. These are professionals, hired guns." He turned to Sarah. "Remember what we practiced. Don't let them draw you into the open." The riders surrounded the ranch house, keeping just beyond clear rifle range. A familiar figure rode forward. Carrington, the railroad man, his eastern suit looking out of place in the falling darkness. "Marshal Cooper," he called out. "I think it's time we had another discussion about progress and cooperation." "Nothing to discuss," Cooper replied, his voice carrying across the yard, "unless you're here to confess to murder and land fraud." "Murder? My dear Marshal, you're letting personal tragedy cloud your judgment. Your sister's death was a terrible accident, nothing more." Carrington's tone dripped with false sympathy. "Though it seems tragedy follows you. I heard about that unfortunate fire in Kansas. The evidence you claim to have, all gone up in smoke." Sarah saw Cooper's knuckles whiten on his rifle, but his voice remained steady. "You're a long way from your eastern boardrooms, Carrington. Might want to ride on while you can." "Oh, I don't think so." Carrington gestured and his men began spreading out, taking positions behind rocks and fences. "You see, we have a schedule to keep. The governor's announcing the railroad contract tomorrow. Can't have any troublesome federal marshals or stubborn ranchers disrupting things." "You really want to add assaulting a federal officer to your charges?" Cooper asked coolly. Carrington laughed. "Charges? My dear man, you have no evidence. That little ledger you took from Matthews, already recovered from the bank's night deposit box. Quite careless of you to leave it there." Sarah felt her heart sink, but Cooper's expression never changed. "That what Matthews told you before you killed him?" A flicker of surprise crossed Carrington's face. Now that truly was unfortunate. Poor man's heart just couldn't take the stress. These things happen, like Catherine Cooper's accident. Sarah called out, unable to contain her anger. "Ah, Miss Mitchell, still so naive." Carrington shook his head in mock sadness. "You really should have taken our first offer. Now I'm afraid we'll have to do this the hard way." He raised his hand, preparing to signal his men. "Last chance," Cooper warned. "Ride away." "I think not." In fact, Carrington's words were cut short by a distant rumble. The ground trembled slightly, and even the hired guns looked uncertain. "Right on time," Cooper said softly, and Sarah realized this was what he'd been waiting for. In the distance, a massive explosion lit up the night sky, followed by another and another. "The railroad camp," Sarah breathed, understanding dawning. "While they were watching us." "Army Rangers," Cooper explained quickly. "Called in some old favors. They're hitting every illegal storage site along the line. All that stolen cattle. All those supplies going up in smoke." Carrington's composure finally cracked. "Kill them!" he screamed. "Kill them all!" The night erupted in gunfire as Sarah, Cooper, and Thomas took their prepared positions. The hired guns were good, but they were exposed, silhouetted against the burning horizon. And Sarah had learned well from Cooper's training. The battle for the Mitchell Ranch had begun. The first wave of attackers hit the broken fence line hard, clearly expecting the ranch's defenders to be concentrated in the house. Instead, they found themselves caught in a devastating crossfire. Cooper had spent days preparing this trap, using his experience to turn the ranch's vulnerabilities into advantages. Sarah's rifle cracked from her position in the barn's hayloft, dropping one of the hired guns from his saddle. The man had been trying to work his way around their flank, not realizing the broken fence post he'd used for cover was deliberately placed there days ago. "Still think I'm naive, Mr. Carrington?" she muttered, working the lever action smoothly as Cooper had taught her. The flash of her muzzle was hidden behind carefully arranged hay bales, making it impossible for the attackers to pinpoint her location. Cooper's voice carried across the yard between bursts of gunfire. "Sarah, watch the creek bed." She shifted position just in time to see shadows moving through the shallow water. 3 men trying to use the creek's bank as cover. Sarah waited until they were fully committed to their approach, then triggered the surprise she and Cooper had prepared that afternoon. The dynamite charge wasn't large, just enough to shower the creek bed with water and gravel. But the explosion sent the would-be flankers scrambling into the open, where Cooper's rifle found them with mechanical precision. From his position near the house, Thomas Mitchell managed their final surprise. He pulled the rope they'd rigged earlier, and a stack of empty barrels crashed down from the barn roof. In the darkness, they looked enough like rolling explosives to send another group of attackers diving for cover, right into the range of Cooper's waiting revolver. "Fall back!" Carrington's voice carried a note of panic now. "Regroup at the road!" But regrouping wasn't in Cooper's plan. As the hired guns retreated, they found their horses had been scattered by the distant explosions at the railroad camp. The few mounts that remained were strategically spooked by more small charges Cooper had set, forcing the attackers to withdraw on foot. Sarah was moving to a new firing position when she heard the crack of a different gun, sharper, closer. A bullet splintered the wood near her head. Through the hayloft window, she caught a glimpse of Clayton Werner, Whitaker's man, working his way around the back of the barn. He must have held back during the main attack, waiting for his moment. "Cooper!" she called out in warning, but the marshal was occupied with the remaining gunmen near the house. Werner was her problem to handle. Sarah remembered her training. "Don't let them draw you into the open. Use their assumptions against them." She moved silently through the hayloft, using the skills Cooper had drilled into her over the past days. Werner's voice drifted up from below. "Come on out, girl. Ain't no shame in losing to a better player. Even your marshal friend can't stop what's coming." Sarah reached the far end of the loft and carefully positioned herself. Below, she could hear Werner moving between the stalls, confident he had her trapped. He was right about one thing. This game was about to end. "You're right," she called out, making her voice shake slightly. "I'm coming down, don't shoot." Werner chuckled. "Smart girl. Slide that rifle out first." Sarah did exactly that, letting her father's rifle clatter down onto the barn floor. Werner stepped into view to retrieve it, exactly where she'd anticipated. His arrogant smile froze as he found himself staring down the barrel of Cooper's Derringer, which Sarah had pulled from her boot. "A smart girl always keeps a hidden advantage," she said coldly, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the barn, followed by the thud of Werner's body hitting the floor. Sarah quickly retrieved both weapons, her hands steady despite the gravity of what she'd just done. Outside, the gunfire had mostly died away. The distant fires from the railroad camp painted the sky in shades of orange and red. Sarah emerged from the barn to find Cooper and her father securing the few surviving attackers, including Carrington, who sat in the dirt, nursing a bullet-creased shoulder. "Werner?" Cooper asked, noting the Derringer in her hand. "Won't be threatening." "Anyone else?" Sarah replied quietly. Cooper nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You did what you had to." "We all did." Thomas Mitchell limped over, his old rifle still smoking. "Army patrols are coming up the road. Looks like your timing worked." "Out, Marshal." "Wasn't just my timing," Cooper said, glancing at Sarah. "Your daughter's a quick study. Turned out to be a better partner than I could have hoped for." But Sarah was looking at Carrington, who still managed to maintain his air of smug superiority. despite his situation. "This isn't over," he said. "The railroad can't be stopped." "Progress. Save it for the judge," Cooper interrupted. "A federal judge this time, one Whitaker hasn't bought." As the army patrol rode into the ranch yard, Sarah felt the weight of the night's events settling over her. They'd won this battle, but Cooper was right. It wasn't over. Whitaker was still out there, and men like Carrington would keep coming, trying to reshape the territory in their own image. But standing there in the aftermath, watching the sunrise begin to paint the sky behind the distant mountains, Sarah knew something else too. They'd found something powerful here, not just evidence against Whitaker, but a partnership forged in fire and trust. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. They rode hard through the pre-dawn hours, leaving the smoldering remains of the railroad camp behind them. Sarah's mother's locket bounced against her chest with each stride, a reminder of what she was fighting for. 2 Army Rangers accompanied them, men who'd served with Cooper in his younger days, while the main patrol escorted the prisoners back to Thunder Creek. "Governor's probably gotten word by now," Cooper said as they paused to rest the horses near a sheltered creek. "He'll try to bury everything, claim we attacked legitimate business interests." Sarah pulled the locket from beneath her shirt, its worn silver surface catching the early light. Inside was a small photograph of her parents on their wedding day. "Young and full of hope, then we make sure the truth can't be buried." "Matthew's murder complicates things," Cooper admitted, checking his rifle for what seemed like the 100th time. "Without his testimony." "But we have the ledger," Sarah started, then saw Cooper's expression. "The real ledger. Not the one they found at the bank." A ghost of a smile crossed Cooper's face. "Had a feeling they'd check the night deposit box. The real one's on its way to a federal judge in Denver, along with sworn statements from 3 other bankers who've been helping Whitaker. Men who decided to talk after seeing what happened to Matthews." One of the Rangers, a weathered man named Jackson, approached with a coffee pot. Patrol spotted dust about 6 miles back. Big group, moving fast. "Whitaker's men?" Sarah asked, accepting a cup of the strong coffee. "More likely the governor's boys," Cooper replied. "He's got a personal militia he uses for special problems. They'll have authorization to arrest us for interfering with territorial development." Sarah felt the weight of her mother's locket in her hand. "We can't go back to Thunder Creek." "No," Cooper agreed, "but I know a place. Old trading post up in the high country, abandoned now. Man who runs it owes me his life. We can hold up there, wait for word from the federal judge." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, taking maze-like trails through rocky terrain. Cooper led them along paths that seemed to double back on themselves, carefully obscuring their trail. Sarah noticed how the Rangers deferred to his expertise, following his lead without question. "You've done this before," she said during a brief rest, watching him check their back trail. Cooper secured his canteen, his movements precise and economical. "After your sister, after Catherine was killed, I spent months tracking Whitaker's operation. Learned every trick they used, every trail they thought was secret." He met her eyes. "Never thought I'd be teaching those same skills to another young woman they tried to destroy." Sarah touched the locket again, thinking of her mother's strength, her father's determination. "They didn't destroy me. They made me stronger." "Yes," Cooper said softly. "They did." The trading post came into view near sunset. A sturdy log structure nestled against a cliff face with clear lines of sight in all directions. An old man with an impressive beard met them at the door, embracing Cooper like a brother. "Figured you'd show up sooner or later," he said, introducing himself as Caleb. "News travels, even up here. They're saying you two started a war with the railroad." "They started it," Sarah replied. "We're just finishing it." Inside, the trading post was well stocked and defensible. Caleb showed them to a hidden room beneath. The main floor, accessed through a trap door concealed by years of dust and trade goods. "Used to hide runners on the Underground Railroad," he explained. "Now it'll hide runners from a different kind of tyranny." That night, Sarah sat cleaning her father's rifle, while Cooper pored over maps with the Rangers, planning their next move. The familiar routine of maintaining the weapon helped calm her thoughts, but she couldn't shake the image of her father, left behind at the ranch. "He's safe," Cooper said, as if reading her mind. "Army patrol won't let Whitaker's men near him, and once the federal judge gets that evidence—" "How long?" "3 days, maybe 4. Judge Crawford's a good man. He'll move fast once he sees what we've sent him." Sarah ran her fingers over her mother's locket one last time before tucking it away. "Then we'd better be ready when he does, because Whitaker won't go down without a fight." "No," Cooper agreed, checking his own weapons with the same careful attention she'd shown. "But this time neither will we." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of change. In the hidden room beneath the trading post, 2 people who'd lost everything to railroad greed prepared to take their stand. And somewhere in the darkness, Whitaker's empire was beginning to crumble. The old marshal's badge lay on the rough-hewn, a table between them, its silver surface dulled by years of service. Sarah studied it in the lamplight, noting the differences from Cooper's current badge. This one was older, from Kansas Territory, its star design speaking of a different era. "I wasn't just investigating the railroad after Catherine died," Cooper said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the wind outside the trading post. "I was part of a special task force commissioned directly by the president. Railroad expansion was changing the West, but corruption was poisoning it. Good people were dying, and no one seemed able to stop it." Sarah looked up from the badge, seeing new depths in Cooper's weathered face. "That's why you were already watching Whitaker when I was accused. Your ranch wasn't the first place he tried these tactics. Over the past 2 years, he's left a trail across 3 territories. Burned homes, mysterious accidents, forced sales. But he was careful, never leaving enough evidence to bring him down." Cooper's hand strayed to his gun belt, a habit Sarah had noticed emerged when he was troubled. "Until now. Because this time he got sloppy? Desperate? Because this time it's bigger than him. The governor, territorial judges, even senators, they're all invested in this railroad line. The bribes, the land grabs, it goes all the way to Washington." Cooper pulled out a worn journal from his saddlebag. "Catherine found out part of it before they killed her. She was a school teacher, good with numbers, started noticing patterns. In land deals, money moving through banks that didn't add up." Sarah took the journal, recognizing the feminine handwriting. She was investigating them too. She thought she was being careful, but Whitaker had people everywhere. The night they came for her, Cooper's voice caught slightly. "I was 2 days right away, working another case. By the time I got there, the fire had destroyed everything except this." He reached into his shirt and withdrew a folded paper carefully preserved. Sarah opened it to find a hand-drawn map showing railroad routes and land parcels. Across the territory, names were marked next to each piece of property, along with dates and dollar amounts. "Catherine's last message," Cooper explained. "She hid it in a book she knew I'd check. It led me to Whitaker, showed me how deep the corruption went, but I couldn't prove it, not enough to bring down everyone involved. Until they tried the same thing with my ranch," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "That's why you were ready. Why you had evidence prepared." Cooper nodded. "I've been building this case for 2 years, gathering threads, waiting for them to make a mistake. When I heard about a young woman being accused of rustling, about to be hanged," his eyes met. "Hers. It was too familiar. I knew I had to stop it." "But you weren't sure about trusting me at first," Sarah observed. "You were watching, testing. Had to be certain. Too many people can be bought, turned against their neighbors. But you—" A rare smile crossed his face. "You reminded me of Catherine. Same fire, same determination to fight back, to fight." Sarah returned the badge to him, noting how his hands closed around it reverently. "What happens when this is over, after we bring them down?" "There's talk of a permanent federal agency dedicated to enforcing law across territory lines. Railroad. Police, they're calling it. They've asked me to help build it." Cooper tucked the badge away. "But first, we finish this. For Catherine, for your ranch, for everyone they've hurt." A sound from above interrupted them. Caleb signaled that riders were approaching. They quickly doused the lamp, moving to their prepared positions. Through the window, Sarah caught glimpses of torchlight moving through the trees. "Whitaker's men," she whispered. Cooper checked his revolvers with practiced ease. No, different riding style, probably the governor's militia. He glanced at her. "Sure you're ready for this? It's not too late to slip away. Let me handle it." Sarah thought of her father's courage, of her mother's strength, of Catherine Cooper's sacrifice. Her hand found the derringer in her boot. Catherine's. "Derringer. I was born ready." In the darkness, Cooper's smile was fierce and proud. "Then let's show them what happens when they underestimate the wrong people." Thunder Creek looked different in the pale morning light, its streets unnaturally quiet as Sarah and Cooper rode in. The cattle brand registration papers Cooper had telegraphed for had arrived at the marshal's office, providing the perfect excuse for their return. But they both knew it was more than that. This was where everything would end. "Town's too quiet," Sarah murmured, noting the closed shops and empty sidewalks. "They're waiting for something." "Governor's making his big announcement today," Cooper replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Railroad contract, new territorial development plans. Every major player will be there, including Whitaker." "Including Whitaker," Cooper confirmed, "along with every corrupt official and bought judge in the territory, all in one place, just like we planned." They'd spent the past 3 days preparing, coordinating with federal agents and honest lawmen from neighboring territories. Judge Crawford's response had been everything they'd hoped for. Arrest warrants for over 30 people, including the governor himself. Now, it was just a matter of timing. The marshal's office was dark when they entered, but Sarah noticed fresh coffee on the stove. "Someone's been here recently." Cooper nodded toward the back room. "Come on out, Bill. We know you're there." Marshal Hawkins emerged, his face haggard with lack of sleep. The past few days had clearly taken their toll on him. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Governor's got warrants out for both of you. Interference with territorial development, destruction of railroad property. Funny how they left out the attempted murder charges," Sarah replied coldly. "Or your son's involvement in the rustling operation." Hawkins flinched. "Billy, he was just following orders. Didn't know how deep it went." "He knew enough to help frame an innocent woman," Cooper said. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" The local marshal slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. "They've got everyone in their pocket. Judge Wilson, Mayor Barnes, even the territorial rangers. What can one man do against that?" "One man?" Sarah stepped forward, placing the cattle brand papers on his desk. "Look around, Marshal. Look at what they've done to your town, your territory. How many more innocent people have to suffer before someone takes a stand?" Hawkins studied the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "These brands, they prove the rustling operation. They prove everything," Cooper confirmed. "Every fake sale, every forged document. Complete paper trail leading right to Whitaker and the governor." A long moment passed as Hawkins wrestled with his conscience. Finally, he reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of papers. "Governor's men came through last night. Handed these out to all the law enforcement in town. Instructions for the ceremony today, security positions, response protocols." He pushed them across the desk. "Might be useful to someone planning to disrupt things." Sarah smiled grimly. "Thank you, Marshal." "Don't thank me," Hawkins replied, strapping on his gun belt. "Just promise me my boy gets a fair trial when this is over." "You have my word," Cooper assured him. "Now, about that ceremony." They spent the next hour reviewing the security plans, identifying weak points and potential allies. More people filtered in as the morning progressed. Shopkeepers who'd been bullied by Whitaker's men, ranchers who'd lost land to suspicious foreclosures, even a few deputies who'd grown tired of enforcing corrupt laws. "Whitaker's bringing in extra muscle," one deputy reported. "Seen at least 20 hired guns riding in since dawn." "Good," Cooper said, surprising everyone. "Means he's nervous. Nervous men make mistakes." Sarah studied the town square through the office window, watching as workers erected a platform for the governor's speech. "What about the federal agents?" "Already in position," Cooper assured her. "Judge Crawford's men have been arriving in small groups for the past 2 days, posing as travelers and merchants. When the time comes, we'll have them outnumbered. And if something goes wrong—" Cooper's hand found hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance that meant more than words. "Then we do what we've done from the start. We adapt, we fight, and we win." The town bell struck 10, and people began filing into the square. Sarah could see Whitaker's men taking up their positions, trying to look inconspicuous among the crowd. On the platform, territorial officials arranged themselves importantly, waiting for the governor's arrival. "Ready?" Cooper asked, checking his weapons one final time. Sarah touched her mother's locket, then felt for Catherine's derringer in her boot. "Born ready." They stepped out into the street together, walking toward what they knew would be their final confrontation with Whitaker and his empire of corruption. Behind them, Marshal Hawkins and the others followed, each person knowing that the next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the future of the entire territory. The die was cast. There was no turning back now. The governor's voice boomed across the town square, full of practiced authority as he extolled the virtues of progress and civilization. Below the platform, Sarah caught glimpses of Whitaker's face in the crowd, his usual composure showing signs of strain. He kept glancing toward the street corners where his gunmen waited, as if reassuring himself of their presence. "And so," the governor continued, "it gives me great pleasure to sign this historic contract, bringing the promise of the railroad to our fair territory." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Governor." Cooper's voice cut through the morning air as he stepped into the clearing before the platform. His marshal's badge caught the sunlight, drawing every eye. "Not with those arrest warrants waiting for your signature instead." The crowd stirred uneasily as Sarah emerged from the opposite side, her father's rifle held ready, but not quite aimed. Other figures appeared at strategic points around the square. Marshal Hawkins, the deputies who joined their cause, and faces that hadn't been seen in town before, all carrying badges that gleamed with federal authority. Whitaker recovered, burst his mask of civility cracking. "This is absurd. Governor, surely you won't let this rogue marshal disrupt—" "Show them, Sarah," Cooper called out, his voice carrying across the square. She pulled out the cattle brand registration papers, holding them high. Complete documentation of every illegal brand used in Whitaker's rustling operation. Notarized statements from 3 territorial bankers about the land fraud scheme. And this, she produced Catherine Cooper's journal. Proof of every bribe, every corrupt deal, every accident, arranged to clear the railroad's path. "Lies!" Whitaker shouted, but the governor's face had gone pale. Around the square, Sarah saw his militia members shifting uncertainly, reading the changing winds. "The only lie," Cooper said clearly, "is that this was ever about progress. It was about greed, corruption, and murder, including the murder of Catherine Cooper, my sister, who discovered your scheme 2 years ago." The name hit Whitaker like a physical blow. His composure finally shattered as recognition dawned. "Cooper, you're her brother." His hand moved toward his coat. "I wouldn't," Sarah warned, her rifle now definitely aimed. "Unless you want to. Add another attempted murder to your charges." But Whitaker had already drawn his derringer, a moment before a shot rang out. The small gun flew from his hand, accompanied by Marshal Hawkins' voice. "Not this time." The square erupted into chaos. Whitaker's hired guns opened fire, but the federal agents were ready. Years of built-up rage and resentment boiled over as townspeople joined the fight, turning on the men who had terrorized them for so long. Sarah found herself back-to-back with Cooper as the battle swirled around them. All those hours of training paid off as they moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's blind spots, dropping gunmen with precise shots. "Governor's running!" she called out, spotting the territorial leader trying to slip away through the chaos. "Got him," Cooper replied, already moving to intercept. But Whitaker had used the distraction to reach his horse. Sarah saw him cutting through the alley behind the bank, heading for the livery stable where she knew fresh horses would be waiting. Without hesitation, she ran for her own mount. The chase led them out of town, hooves thundering along the road toward the railroad. Camp. Sarah urged her horse faster, gaining ground on Whitaker's heavier stallion. Ahead, she could see smoke rising from the camp, evidence that not all the fires from their raid had been extinguished. Whitaker veered suddenly, taking a trail that led toward the high canyon walls. Sarah recognized the path. It led to a dead end. He must not know these lands as well as he thought. She rounded the final bend to find Whitaker dismounted, his back to the canyon wall, a second derringer aimed steadily at her. "End of the line, girl," he spat. "Just like your friend Cooper's sister. Should have taken our offer when you had the chance." Sarah stayed mounted, her rifle trained on him. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." His finger tightened on the trigger, a moment before Cooper's voice rang out from above. "Drop it, Whitaker!" The cattle baron looked up to find Cooper on the canyon rim, rifle aimed down at him. More horses approached from behind Sarah, Marshal Hawkins and the federal agents cutting off any escape. "It's over," Sarah said quietly. "The railroad's coming, but not your way, not built on blood and corruption." Whitaker's arm trembled, then slowly lowered. As Cooper descended to take him into custody, Sarah saw something she never expected, tears in the cattle baron's eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "None of you understand. I had to keep up with progress." "No," Cooper said firmly, securing the handcuffs. "You had a choice, just like we all did. You chose greed. We chose justice." As they led Whitaker back toward town, Sarah looked over the canyon land stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, railroad. Crews would eventually lay their tracks. But they would do it legally, honestly, without destroying the people who had built their lives here. The territory would change, but its spirit, the spirit of people like her parents, like Catherine Cooper, like all those who had fought for what was right, would endure. The territorial courthouse had never been so crowded. Every bench was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Sarah sat in the front row beside her father, watching as Judge Crawford reviewed the court documents spread across his bench. 2 weeks had passed since the showdown in Thunder Creek. Federal agents had spent those days following the evidence, uncovering the full extent of Whitaker's operation. The list of defendants had grown daily as more people came forward, either to confess or to testify against their former conspirators. "The evidence presented to this court," Judge Crawford began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, "reveals a conspiracy of unprecedented scope and malice. Through systematic corruption, intimidation, and violence, the defendants sought to subvert the very foundations of law and justice in this territory." Sarah glanced at Whitaker, seated with the other defendants. His expensive suit couldn't hide how much he'd aged in the past 2 weeks. Behind him, the governor and other territorial officials sat in shocked silence, their power and influence stripped away by the truth. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the attempted murder of Sarah Mitchell, the confirmed murder of Catherine Cooper, and the death of banker Matthews reveal the lengths to which these men would go to protect their criminal enterprise." Cooper stood at the back of the courtroom, his new deputy marshal's star gleaming on his chest. The federal agency he'd mentioned was becoming reality, with him as one of its founding officers. His eyes met Sarah's briefly, sharing a moment of quiet triumph. "Before passing sentence," Judge Crawford said, "does any defendant wish to address the court?" Whitaker rose slowly, his voice barely recognizable from the confident cattle baron he'd once been. "Your Honor, everything I did, it was for progress. The territory needed the railroad, needed development, sometimes hard choices. Sarah couldn't help herself, standing to face him. "You murdered innocent people. You tried to destroy families, steal their land, hang me for crimes you committed. That wasn't progress, Mr. Whitaker. That was greed, plain and simple. The judge allowed her words to stand, nodding slowly. Indeed, progress built on corruption, and blood is no progress at all. He lifted his gavel. Thomas Whitaker, this court sentences you to life imprisonment for your crimes. The same sentence applies to your primary conspirators. The gavel fell with finality, and Sarah felt years of tension release from her shoulders. Around the courtroom, she saw similar relief on other faces. Ranchers who would keep their land, families who would see justice for their losses, a community freed from corruption's grip. Outside the courthouse, Cooper joined them in the autumn sunlight. "Railroad companies sending new representatives next week," he said. "Honest ones this time, with federal oversight. They'll negotiate fair prices for any land they need." Thomas Mitchell smiled, looking stronger than he had in months. "Might be willing to sell them a right-of-way through the south pasture, fair price, legal contract." "And the water rights?" Sarah asked. "Stay with the ranches," Cooper assured her. "Judge Crawford's orders. Railroad has to work around existing claims, not through them." Marshal Hawkins approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Mitchell, I wanted to apologize for everything. Billy's agreed to testify about the whole operation. Won't make up for what happened, but—" Sarah surprised herself by taking his offered hand. "No, it won't. But it's a start." As people dispersed, Cooper lingered. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to make a difference." He pulled something from his coat, a deputy marshal's badge. "The new agency needs people who understand the territory, who've proven they can stand up to corruption. People like you." Sarah stared at the badge, feeling its weight in more than just silver. "You're offering me a job?" "Offering you a chance to help other families like yours, like Catherine's." His eyes held a question. "What do you say?" She thought of the past weeks, the fear, the fighting, but also the pride of standing up for what was right, of making a real difference. The badge gleamed in her hand, a promise of more battles to come, more chances to protect those who needed it. "When do I start?" Spring came early to the Mitchell Ranch, painting the hills in shades of green and gold. Sarah stood on the porch, her deputy marshal's badge catching the morning light as she watched the railroad surveyors working in the distance. Their presence no longer carried the weight of threat, just the promise of legitimate progress. "Looks like they'll have the first section of track laid by summer," Thomas Mitchell said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. His hands were steadier now, the strain of recent months easing from his face. "Changed times, ain't they?" Sarah accepted the coffee, smiling at the sight of Cooper riding up the road. These days his visits were as much personal as professional. "Good changes, though." Cooper dismounted, carrying a leather document case. "Partnership agreement," he explained, joining them on the porch. "Railroad's final offer for the right-of-way. Everything above board, fully documented." Thomas took the papers inside to review them, leaving Sarah and Cooper in the morning quiet. She touched her mother's locket, now sharing space with her. "Badge. Catherine would be proud, you know, of what we've built here. A new kind of law," Cooper agreed, his hand finding hers, "one that serves justice, not power." In the distance, the surveyor's work continued, marking the path where steam engines would eventually run. But they worked under new rules now. Respect for the land, fair compensation for its owners, honest deals instead of corrupt force. The Mitchell Ranch would endure, adapting to the changing times while holding on to its principles. And Sarah would continue her new role, protecting others from the kind of injustice she'd faced, building something stronger than corruption or greed. The future stretched before them like the endless prairie, full of promise and possibility. Together, they'd proved that one person's stand for justice could change everything, and that was a story worth riding toward. And